Laura Kowal. She's the founder, owner, and operator of Able Veg. Look it up. Follow her on Facebook. She's extraordinary. She's extraordinary. Barbara and I earlier in last year.
That would have been,
Was it this year?
Maybe it was this year.
It was this year.
Early on.
Attended an OSU training by the fairgrounds, and you were there, right? And she was just tremendous. And I knew that rather than trying to bring in other subject matter experts, that she was the person that could take us from one season to the next season, from one subject to the next subject, providing the information that we need in order to have a successful garden, including ornamental gardening. You know, I haven't done it yet, but we had scheduled it, and I got sick for her to come out to our actual garden to see. She's been out there before, but for the specific purpose of saying, you know, this is the way what you should plant here, and this is what you should plant here, and this is the way that it will look, because it's a demonstration garden. And if I'm planting all the tall stuff over here, I may be hiding some of the pretty flowers over here. I've never planted flowers in between, but she does all that too. So she's just a gem, and we have thoroughly enjoyed her over these last few months. All right, Laura, it's in your hands.
Okay. All right, so today we're talking about, this one's called Intro to Canning. Usually people learn water bath canning first, just because people are less intimidated by it, I think. But one of the bigger things, and we'll talk about this a little more, but is it doesn't take the same amount of processing time. Pressure canning just takes more time. And so I think that's part of it too, because I know when I first started canning, I didn't want to try it on something that was going to process for an hour, only I have to reprocess for another hour. It's much quicker than that. So water bath canning is a great place to start. We'll skip through, these are just some of our, well, it warrants saying, so these are pictures of our garden, and I show these in most of my presentations, and I didn't realize I'm not in the presentation mode, am I? But point being here, when you have a big garden, or if you just buy things in bulk, it's one of those things that you can really utilize all of the stuff that you have in your garden. Hold on, I'm trying to change the view for you all. There we go. There we go, okay. So we've got a lot of space, and depending on the year, this year we have so many peppers, I just don't know what to do with them. Every spring we have so many radishes that come in, and there will be a period of time where we just simply can't eat all of them. So whenever you have crops that come in really strong, canning was one of the original ways, really, when you're talking American history aside from burying foods and things like that. One of the earliest ways for preserving. These are just other pictures of our gardens. But these are pictures of our shelves with our canned goods. So I can stuff a lot. I haven't as much this summer because I've been working at Tulsa Youth Works Ranch too in their gardens, so we've been busy. But you can see this pretty jar in the middle with all the yellow stuff in it. This is a green tomato and what else was in there? Onions and pepper pickled condiment that I made. Why? Because we had a frost and I had a whole bunch of green tomatoes and peppers that came in, and I was like, well, I don't know what to do with this stuff, because we don't have enough to really, just do some green tomatoes, and we're not going to eat them in time. So it's a way to utilize those. But we have all kinds of jams and jellies and things in here as well. Lots of pickles, lots of fruit, and we were really poor for a really long time, and so we tended to buy things at the grocery store when they were on sale. If it was the week, in the upper right-hand corner here you see cherries. If it was the week, cherries weren't, but they're like $12 a pound. So, they get really expensive. Then we would just buy them in bulk and freeze them or can them to make it more affordable so we could enjoy them. This is my why slide that I always do at the beginning of class. So why learn canning techniques? So the first one is to utilize produce at its peak. And this is big because if you're going to a farmer's market, if you go to the food bank, if you are out in your garden or you have a neighbor that gardens, and you have that extra stuff I was talking about, this is a great way to utilize all that stuff. Eating locally is a big thing, and that's been kind of a food movement over the last decade or so. And it's just the ability to utilize produce that's grown around you from small farmers and farmers markets. I'm happy to say Tulsa is starting to see more small farms happening. I want to say that Fresh RX, I was talking with them, and I think Aaron over there said they have 3 new small farms that happened with some younger people who were just starting this year. So that's a good thing. We want all of that in our community. The next is to incorporate more healthy foods into your diet. This is a big one for me too. My kids, I adopted our kids, and when they came to us, they basically subsisted on fast food. And so trying to get them to eat anything else was really, really challenging. And that's not how we eat. You know, I used to joke with them, well, you ended up with the wrong mom who owns a vegetable gardening company if you're flat refusing to eat any vegetables because it's not going to work. And it's the same thing with my kids with Tulsa Youth Works. Those kiddos come from hard places, and some of them have never eaten a cherry tomato. I brought cherry tomatoes. They've never tried it before. But they love hot sauce and they love pickles. So it's an easy way to start incorporating some additional foods that are healthy into the foods that you already have. And then the next one is to create the foods you love in the way you like them. This is a big one for pickles because nothing is more disappointing if you like pickles than a crummy pickle. You know, you open it, it just tastes like vinegar, or there's no flavor to it, or it's way too sweet, or not sweet enough. And so this is the way. Yeah, and we're also particular, aren't we? It's crazy, but this is the way that you can find a recipe, and then you get to make the ones that you like, just the way you like it. Maybe you don't like pickled cucumbers, but you like pickled carrots. That's an easy thing to do, pickled asparagus. So you can create the things that you actually enjoy. And the next one is to create homemade gifts. My parents apparently this year just threw in the towel to us buying them stuff, and they just want the kids to make them drawings and me to send them loofahs and canned goods. It's great, right? Because they don't need stuff. But who doesn't love opening a nice jar of salsa or something that's fresh from your garden? So it's a way that you can really share. A way that when I've had friends or people that come into, I teach yoga part-time at the yoga studio. One of the gentlemen there lost his wife a few months ago, so I brought him a bunch of canned goods to, just something easy to eat when you're going through something. So it's a really nice way of sharing with your community as well. And then the last one here is carrying on the tradition. We're seeing this uptrend, I think, a little bit in younger people where things like sewing and woodworking, canning, those things are starting to come back. People are starting to see that even though no, you don't have to can your own foods, there's a lot of benefit to keeping these things going that people have done for thousands of years now. And here's my obligatory safety warning. People get really worried about this. I have had exactly one of my jars mold, and the seal just got broken, and I knew it because I looked at it and there was mold in it. Like, you know, I mean, there was no science behind it. I've never been afraid to eat my canned goods. But you do want to be careful, and you do want to follow strong guidelines, especially when you're learning. Now I have enough experience that I can kind of look at a recipe and say, I just don't think there's enough acid in that. I don't feel comfortable with it. This isn't the time to start looking at blogs, right? I love food blogs and I love getting good recipes from them. But until you're familiar, I have also seen some things that very specifically should be pressure canned for safety reasons on blogs, and they say you don't have to. So make sure you're just being safe. And this is logic too. Like there was a guy in one of my Facebook groups who said, well, we canned some peaches and they had some mold on them, so I just scraped it off and ate them and they tasted. Like, don't be that guy, you know? It's common food sense. This is something we've all bought stuff from the store and realized, oh shoot, the seal must have opened. Same thing. Common sense here. Your general guidance is just to use the best, freshest ingredients. I'll harp on that because it's the exact same thing as when you're cooking a meal at home. If you get less quality ingredients, your outcome is going to be less fantastic. So it's best to do this very seasonally. And the focus on seasonality is fun too, because I have a pumpkin pineapple preserve that I do that's really good around the holidays. We'll use up some of our Halloween pumpkins in that. I do cranberry relish every year because that's around the holidays, and that's a great holiday gift to give to people because it's exponentially better than that gel thing that comes out in the shape of the can, you know? And then select your focus, small or large batch. I have some books here that I'll share with you. And this just means if you have enough cucumbers to make a few jars of pickles, find a recipe that caters to a few jars of pickles. If you've got a whole 60-foot row of cucumbers, don't be trying to do the math of a recipe that's made to make 3 jars. Find one that's for a larger batch. It'll just make your life easier. Yeah, Barbara.
Also, when you have cucumbers, make sure that you're planting pickling cucumbers.
Yes. Yeah, the pickling ones are better for, like lemon cucumbers and stuff, they're okay, but the seeds are to get you weird. Yeah.
Sometimes they don't taste very good at all.
Yeah. And then how much can you really eat? And this is important too, because if you're not a family that, like I have a Bloody Mary mix that we make, and it's a Bloody Mary mix because that's what I got for my candidate fermented book. But my kids really like it with this fresh squeezed lemon in it, so we'll put some soda water. There's no alcohol involved, obviously. I'm giving it to my kids. There's no alcohol. But that's the way I can get them to drink kind of a fresh tomato juice drink, and they like it a lot because it's nice and cold. But if you're not in a family that likes tomato juice, not a good investment of your time. Even if you've got the stuff on hand, focus your energies on something else. And then plan the best use of your ingredients. Like my pumpkin pineapple compote, that came from, I had these pie pumpkins, didn't know what to do, and pineapple was on sale, and it just so happened I saw it. It was like, this sounds so crazy, it might actually be good. And it was. So that's a good way. You want to be sure that you're using all of the stuff that you have. When I showed you that green tomato relish, same thing. We had green tomatoes, and you'll notice as you start going through this, there's such a focus on seasonality because this was what all of our grandparents, great-great-grandparents did. They would go out to the garden and say, wow, we've got all of these peppers and tomatoes. What are we going to do with them? Because they didn't have refrigeration. And so you can find recipes that are a lot of those kind of classic dishes that I feel like should make a comeback too, because a lot of those are really delicious. It's just ingredients that necessarily you don't find at the grocery store, but you find them in your own garden. And then a big one, ensure you have all your supplies on hand before you begin. I'm one of those people that, you know, when you get a new recipe, the first rule is that you read through the whole thing to be sure. I never do that, and it ends pretty badly every once in a while. You know, I get halfway done and realize I screwed it. So I get it. But with canning, it is a timing-oriented task, so you do want to be sure you've got everything ready to go. There's a few types of canning. So the water bath is what we're learning today. This just uses a boiling water bath in order to preserve your food. And it's in an airtight, high acid environment in this case, and that's what keeps your food safe to eat. The next is pressure canning, and Arnett and I were talking about this. This is where you utilize a pressure canner or certain pressure cookers to process foods, and this just gets the temperature up higher. So you don't rely on that acid as much in pressure canning. You're relying on that temperature a little bit more. The last one is fermenting, and I don't know if any of you do that. Yeah, but it's slightly different. Fermenting is more of a different process, really. You can also can your fermented foods. I have canned my sauerkraut, but it does get rid of some of the beneficial bacteria that you want from your ferment. So fermenting is a little bit different. And there are some fermenting books in this, or fermenting recipes in this little book too, and it's another really fun process. I really like half my family, my dad's whole side of the family is Russian, so we're big sauerkraut eaters. I'm wondering, my kids got sold on pickles this year. I'm wondering if I can sell them on sauerkraut. Maybe we'll keep revisiting.
Okay.
So what works with the water bath canning method? Lots and lots of stuff. So anything fruit-oriented, purees, juices, jams, jellies, pickles, pickled cucumbers, pickled vegetables, if you have green beans, asparagus. You do, again, want to use a recipe. Different types of different vegetables have different acidity, so a tomato is going to be different than asparagus, so you want to use recipes. Tomatoes are definitely a good one. You can do whole tomatoes, tomato paste, peeled in water. You can do lots of tomato recipes. If you're doing tomatoes, since they are not going to have the same level of acidity that you add, they're not going to have a lot of the vinegar and lemon juice, you do want to follow a recipe, but you can absolutely do that. Big thing here is don't use water bath canning for just vegetables that have no acidity added. Meats, fish, soup, stews, sauces, a lot of those things are a no. And I know when I get to this point, I feel like I lose a bunch of people and they're like, well, that's all I wanted to do. There's plenty of things that you can do. You definitely want to know how to water bath can, because the things that you can do, you can make more simplified with water bath canning. So there's plenty that you'll use this for. So to get a little more in the weeds there, fruit spreads or chutneys, salsas, if you make homemade salsa, that's an excellent one. And then we have tomato sauces, juice, Bloody Mary mix, all of that stuff. Condiments are a big one. I have barbecue marinade at home, and then I have, this is mustard, sage mustard, because we had a bunch of sage, and I bought mustard seeds in bulk. I didn't realize how much would come in a 15-pound bag of mustard seeds, so we're gonna have mustard for a long time. But this is a sage honey mustard, and it's really, really good. Hot sauce too. I'll be making, this was cayenne pepper from last year, but I'll be making Tabasco sauce this year. Great thing to do. So lots of options there. The barbecue sauces are fun and really, really good, and you can get really specific with what flavor you like, which is a lot of fun. Infused vinegars, jellies, jams, and then one of the big ones too, fruit and water or syrup. So we do that a lot with pineapple because my kids like the canned pineapple, but there's so much sugar added to them generally, so we can do it with far less and with fresher ingredients. So lots and lots of options. My point on that one being, just don't knock it or discount it because it's not soups or stews. You can definitely do that with pressure canning, but there's a lot of stuff that you can do with the water bath method. So canning equipment, the first thing you need is a large non-reactive pot. Reactive cookware is generally going to refer to aluminum or copper or iron that doesn't have an enameled coating on it. It'll leave kind of a metallic taste in your food. It's not dangerous, but you might not get a good flavor from it. And so a big non-reactive pot, this is actually the one I got off of Amazon and I love it. It's the biggest size I can get without having it be commercial kitchen size. It's a great purchase. I think it was like $45 and I use it all the time. And so ideally you want one that's at least 20 quarts. You can even use a tiny one, but you're only gonna be able to fit a couple jars in there because keep in mind, whatever you're using, you need the jars to be, they can be pretty close, but you don't want them touching because if you cram them in there and they start shaking, they can crack the other jars. So you can eyeball it and say, okay, I could probably fit 4 or 5 of these or 10 of these, whatever the case may be. You want to be sure you have enough space. And you can always do multiple processes as well. So if you need to do one batch and then do the other, you can do that. I love the one on the bottom picture here. This was my husband's grandmother's that my mother-in-law gave us when I started canning. I was like, that's so lovely. And then I noticed my eye doctor has one of those they use as an umbrella bin, and it's making me really mad. I should just go tank it. Look, I bought you a new fancy umbrella bin. I'm taking that back. Okay, the next one is a metal rack. So this is important. In the same way you don't want to put your jars too close together when they start wiggling, you want to be sure your jars aren't sitting right on the bottom of the pot because once it starts boiling and bubbling, it'll shake them around and can crack your jars and also cause some uneven heating if it's right on that surface. So you all probably have one of these, like a steamer basket or something that goes in one of your pots. If not, they're very inexpensive to buy. So you want one that fits in there. The one on the bottom that came with my in-laws is this gray. It has little handles so you can lower it in and take it back out. So they make lots of styles here. And we'll go through all this equipment again because I brought it here so we can look at it. Here's a canning funnel. The only difference with the canning funnel is it has a wider bottom on it. If you're doing something that's purely liquid, a regular kitchen funnel will work. But if you're trying to put apples into a jar, it's not going to work. So a canning funnel can be really helpful and cut down on a lot of mess. A ladle, you all probably have that. That's a pretty easy one. And the next are a bubble popper or measuring tool. We'll go into the process of why these are important. You want those on hand. And then the next ones are a jar wrench, a jar lifter, and a magnetic lid lifter. The one on the left is a jar wrench. It's for picking jars up from the side. The one on the right is a jar lifter, and that's the easiest way to scoop down into the boiling water to remove it. If you're gonna get any fancy equipment, I think those two are the handiest ones to have because it's really hard with tongs to get jars out without burning yourself or risking dropping them and breaking them. And then the lid lifter is to take your lids out of simmering water without having to use tongs. Makes it a lot less cumbersome. And if you don't have all this, you can absolutely improvise. There's ways to do it using materials you have in your kitchen. I will say though, my blue set that I have here, I think it was maybe $15, $20 on Amazon. It's not very expensive. Your pot is going to be the one investment if you don't have it that you want to make, and is a nice big pot for yourself. Other canning equipment is just basic kitchen tools. If you are a home cook, more than likely you have some of these. Potato masher, measuring cups. The biggest measuring cup I had was a 2-cup before, and I really do rely on my 4-cup now. It just makes it easier. If you're making a huge batch of pickles and you need 16 cups of liquid, walking back and forth to the sink 16 times is painful. So having the bigger ones can be very helpful. And then your husband can steal them and use them for fluids in the garage or feeding your chickens. and then you get to get a new one every, 60 to 90 days. Measuring spoons, lint-free towels, we'll talk a little bit about that, and then good knives. Good knives are great for this because it just makes chopping easier, especially when you're doing a big batch of stuff. Way easier to do it if you have a nice kitchen knife. And then remember, all of these should be non-reactive. USDA does provide really good guidance on their website. You can just Google USDA and canning and it'll come up. But they say plastic tools are the best. I use some stainless tools. If I'm buying good kitchen tools, since I'm in the kitchen a lot, I tend to buy metal just because it'll last you really forever. So that's an option as well. So next are the jar sizes. So the first one, the 32 ounce I have on here, is good for family meals or frequently eaten snacks. That's this size. These are cinnamon apples, which really need to be eaten. That's too bad. We'll have to eat them on pancakes or something. I found them in the back and they're ready to go. So this is a fairly large size, really good for pie filling, if you're wanting to make some kind of pie filling. The next one down is the 16 ounce. These are cinnamon beads, which are also delicious. These are really good for, like, if you wanted pasta sauce for a few people, if you want condiments, and it's one you use a lot of. We go through a lot of barbecue sauce, and so I use this a lot for a barbecue sauce. The next size down is the most standard size, and this is the 8 ounce. This is really good for like 2 servings of sauces. This is when I put my hot sauce and my mustard in, because it just keeps it fresher for a little bit longer. And so these are, it's 1 cup, right? So 1 cup of different things. Also really good for fruits, because you can have 1 to 2 servings out of each one. And then the smallest one are these little guys, these little 4 ouncers. These are good. This one's a Bloody Mary mix, so it would be if one of my kids came in and wanted to make a tomato juice, then this would be one that he would just mix some of his soda water in with some lemon. So good for a single serving. Also really good, I made ghost pepper sauce one year, and that stuff was, I liked some hot sauce, but that was hot. You're not going to use 2 tablespoons of it at the time. You're using a 1/4 teaspoon maximum. So a really good size for something like that you don't need much of. Then a few canning ingredients specifically to keep on hand. Canning or kosher salt. It's not that much more expensive than getting iodized salt. The iodized salt, the table salt, just has that iodine in it, which can make your jars look cloudy. It's safe, but it just doesn't look as appealing. So the canning and kosher salt is a nice thing to have on hand. Vinegar. I'm now the person that goes into Walmart and you know those ridiculous 5-gallon jugs of vinegar. I buy those now. I'm that person. The people that deliver our groceries in Tulsa must think I'm crazy sometimes, because I'll be like 30 pounds of pineapple, and five jugs of vinegar. But those are great things to have on hand, and especially, you don't need to get a huge bottle, but a sizable one. If you're doing something like an apple cider vinegar-based recipe, if you get small bottles, it's way more expensive than if you get the bigger ones, and they last a good long time. Sugar is another one. You can use artificial sweeteners, so there are recipes that will call out for artificial sweeteners, so if you're trying to cut sugar out of them, you can absolutely do that. Be aware that you do want a recipe that works with the artificial sweetener, so make sure you find one for that. You can, however, though, substitute brown sugar or honey. I typically use brown sugar and honey mixed in barbecue sauces instead of white sugar, because I think it tastes better. It adds a different dimension of flavor. Whereas if you're just doing something like the cinnamon apples, those might be good with brown sugar, but the table sugar is going to make them delicious just on its own. The last one is lemon juice. USDA recommends buying the store-bought lemon juice. Lemons can vary in acidity. That being said, fresh lemon juice does taste better. So if you're wanting to do, especially a small batch, you might want to go with juicing a few lemons at home. But I will say I make a strawberry lemonade concentrate that, I was going to say my kids, but everyone just loves. It's really, really good. And in that case, I just use the bottled lemon juice in the store. So it is actual lemon juice. You want to be sure you're getting actual lemon juice, and then frozen strawberries instead of the fresh, because it's cheaper and it's easier to puree them. So definitely nice to have some lemon juice on hand. Now we're going to go through the steps, and I do have a video I'll play for you too going through all of these steps. The first one is to wash all your jars and lids in soapy water. I get kind of lazy with this stuff, and so I have to remind myself, you do need to wash the jars. You can't, even if though they look clean, you can't use them. run them through the dishwasher. I did forget, and it was an honest oversight on my part, I just stacked lids once, and I canned with them, and I'm sure they were safe, but it did almost add kind of a plastic flavor to some of my cans, so just make sure that you're washing everything well. So next step, we'll talk a little bit about safety here. The next official step is to sterilize your jars. So you can do this by putting them in water, bringing the water to a boil. You don't want to put them in boiling water. You want to bring them up to temperature with the water and simmering them for 10 minutes, and that'll fully sterilize the jars. However, you can also wash and place the dry jars in the dishwasher. It used to be USDA said you had to boil all of this stuff to get it sanitary, and that's kind of fallen by the wayside now. You know, I mean, soap and water works really well, and you are sterilizing in the water bath once you put them in there. So I skipped this step. If you're overly concerned, you can absolutely do this, but it just adds another pot of water and another part to the process. There is something called a cold pack method, and it'll say it in your recipe, and this would be for pickles are a great example. If you're pickling asparagus, it'll tell you make your brine and then cold pack your asparagus, meaning put your asparagus in there and then just pour the cool brine over it. For some of those, that's fine. You do want to be sure that you are starting those cold pack methods, everything is cool, versus the hot pack method, things are warm. Reason being, if you have boiling liquid, say you're making a fruit syrup and it's boiling, and you pack your pineapple or whatever into a jar, and it's sitting on your cold countertop, and you pour boiling liquid in there, it could very well crack your jar. So again, you just want to be sure you're looking at the recipe and saying, okay, this is a cool pack method, so my jars can be cooled off. This one is warm, so I need to maybe warm them in the oven. Next step is lids. You must use new lids each time you do canning. That's the only thing. And by lids, I'm not talking about the rings, just this little metal part. Some people reuse them. I have reused them. It made me feel a little nervous that they weren't gonna seal. And for the cost of just the lids, that's the smallest cost to you really. I don't do it anymore because I'm not interested in doing a whole batch of something only to realize my stupid lids didn't stick or I feel like they're not working. So I recommend using new lids. They're not very expensive. The bands that you screw the lid on with, those can be reused as long as they're in good condition. Eventually they'll kind of rust or you might bend or dent them and then you can discard those. But you get new ones whenever you buy jars. So most of us who can have big bins of rings anyway, so you won't need to replace those. Now, USDA just dropped this step, but I think this is an easy step. This is just taking a little saucepan, putting your lids in there and simmering them for 10 minutes. So that's a nice, easy step for me. USDA has backed off and said you can skip that step even as long as you have clean lids. So step 4, and I love this presentation too because it's like prepare your recipe, which could take you 3 hours, but you know, prepare your recipe. And then fill your jars, leaving the recommended headspace. Headspace is the amount of space between the top of your cooked food or your product and the rim of the jar. Headspace is important because once your jars are in your boiling water and they're moving around, they're actually going to need little pockets of air in that lid so that some of the gases can escape. If they're screwed on too tightly and you don't have enough headspace, your jars can break. So you want to be sure you're following headspace. Every recipe will tell you this should have 1 inch of headspace. This should be a 1/4 inch of headspace. So it'll be very, very specific. So just make sure you're looking. And then you want to be sure to use a bubble popper or a spatula. So all this is taking your jar, you put your bubble popper in, and then you just kind of draw it around the sides and tilt it from side to side to get air bubbles out. Sometimes this isn't a big issue, but you'll find if you're doing pickles, or a great example again here, you'll get air bubbles between them that could dramatically change your headspace. So you could, if you don't use your bubble popper, there could be enough bubbles that you take out your jar and the liquid is down to here and you have cucumbers sticking out the top. So run your bubble popper around. And then this step is very important, and you'll see me emphasize this in the video too, because I've forgotten to do this, and this becomes even more important when you're pressure canning. You want to wipe the rims with a damp towel or paper towel. This is where those lint-free towels come into place, because if you have a big floofy towel, and you're making jelly and it's really sticky and you run that towel around the edge, you're gonna get little sticky pieces of towel all around it. You can wipe the rims with just some water, will work fine. If it's something extra sticky or greasy, then I tend to use some white distilled vinegar to make sure it's clean. This is important because if there is anything sticky or anything stuck to the rim or anything oily stuck to the rim, your jar isn't going to seal properly. It's not going to get that stickiness that it needs. So you want to be sure to wipe your jars. Next step is to put your lids and bands on the jars and then tighten your bands just until you feel resistance. So you just take it and then I usually use 3 fingers and tighten right then. If you take it and give it another quarter turn, now no air can escape and you risk your jars bursting. So they call it fingertip tight to where it's nice and tight on there. So now you
Excuse
start.
me.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's the first time I heard that.
Yeah.
That is the first time I heard that because I do this. I do. Now, one of the reasons that I do it is because I don't have a lot of strength in this hand. I've had this hand crushed before, and so I want to make sure that it's tight. So I give efforts like that on just about everything, but I've never heard of just finger tight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it really, think of it this way too. If your jar doesn't seal, because it does happen every once in a while, if something will be on the rim, one of them just doesn't work. You want to know, like that's pretty important because then you can reprocess it. Then you can say, okay, this one didn't seal. Let's pop it in the fridge and we'll eat this one first. But bursting jars is bad. I only had one actually burst, and that was such a bummer because I had 4 of these beautiful jars of stew in there, and it knocked the lid off of one of the other ones, and it was a mess to clean up because it was this giant pot of water, and then I had to clean glass pieces out of there. So you do want to be careful. But fingertip tight is going to be good. You want that jar to have as much opportunity to seal as possible. So now we're actually doing the water bath canning process. Fill your pot with water. We talked about this a little. If you're using the cold pack method, start with cool water. You want to start, again, if it's a cold jar, put it in cool water. Don't put a cold jar into a pot of boiling water, or that can crack. If you're filling it with warm or hot food, if you have hot jam or jelly, start the water kind of warm. Again, you're trying to just kind of even things out. Lower the fill jars into the water one at a time with your jar lifter. And you want to ensure that the water for water bath canning covers your jars by 1 to 2 inches. Just in case something evaporates, because if your jar becomes uncovered, you have to reprocess again. So make sure you have that extra water if you need to. And then bring them to a boil, cover it just so you don't get a lot of evaporation, and then process for the recommended time. And this is important too, when you start your processing is when the water comes back to a boil. You'll see that in the video. So if, I can't tell what I'm canning here. We'll go with salsa. If you're canning salsa and you put it in there, you wait for your pot to come to a boil. And if it says to process for 10 minutes, once it's boiling, it's 10 minutes from that point. And again, usually recipes will say that. Bring the pot to a boil, wait 5 minutes, or bring the pot to a boil, start your timer. They'll let you know the exact process. So step 9, after your time is done, remove your jars with the jar lifter. I like to lift mine up and put a hand towel under it just in case something slips, because they will be really hot and you don't want to burn your hand. And then place them on a kitchen towel or a cutting board or something similar, not directly on the cold countertop. And then let them sit without moving for 24 hours. 24 hours is recommended. Sometimes I've done 12. The only reason that this is supposed to happen is because if you knock them together while they're still trying to seal, if they're not completely cooled yet, then it can disrupt your seals and kind of pop the lid off. So you do want to leave them undisturbed for a
I
while.
have a question.
Uh-huh.
Has anyone in here found that the sealing process, well, the quality of the lids and the seals is just not the same the way that used to? Everything used to pop. Everything doesn't pop now. It's just like I need to test it to make sure that everything is down. Everything is not popping. And I don't know if it's the quality or not. I've gotten some that the seal end up warping after, I put everything in and I'm like, what happened? What happened?
I mean, it looked like it was sealed, but because it warped, and these are balls.
Honestly, I've used some, I buy some off-brand, I can't remember what they're called, from Amazon, and I've
Uh-huh.
used them, I got them during COVID because Kang Supplies were in short supply,
Right.
but they've done really well. They're
Okay.
cheaper, so I don't know, I haven't used the ball lids for a while.
Okay.
It used to be too, when my grandmother, who canned all the time, she lived on a great-grandmother, when she lived on a self-sustaining farm, so this is what they ate all winter. There's a way that they would take the lid and put wax on it, boiling wax. I'm not totally familiar with that process, but it used to be that you would do the same work on the lid and you would put the wax on it. There are still people who can that way and know how to do it. And it's very cool. I've seen some pictures and videos of people who have these jars that are like 150 years old and they still can with them. Yeah, it's very cool. And I just keep thinking I would drop it. Like I can guarantee you that would be the one that I tripped over my dog or something and dropped. But so the wax seal on here, and you guys can come up and look at these. It doesn't look super substantial. It's just this reddish brown around. And I have noticed like this one has a little bump in one corner of it. Every once in a while you'll see one that the wax doesn't fully cover. And they're made by machines now. It's not perfect. But yeah, you want to be careful with the other steps, and hopefully that helps minimize the ones that don't seal, because it's always disappointing. And if
Well,
it's
that's
just
what I was wondering, if it's something like that, a bump or something that would cause that?
it could be. Yeah, you might be tightening them too much, Arnetta.
Well, they also, have, sometimes you can, too high a heat when you put them in the water, just, they don't simmer them, they put them in too high a heat and it messes
Yeah.
with that wax part of it too. That's what they tried to problem solve, and that was one of the reasons was, I mean, it might be 1,000 reasons, but it was because the water was too hot and you let it in there too long, and it messed with that stuff. Because that says simmer, it doesn't say,
Right.
you know what I mean, leave it
Right.
hot water.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, because I've had this happen more so with pressure canning, because you're working with foods with a higher fat content, so it tends to get more on the rim. But I once or twice been like, why are half of these not sealing? And it's so frustrating, because it's like your processing time is an hour, and then you have to wait for your pressure canner to come back to 0, which means it's like an hour and 40-minute process. And so starting that over again, and of course it was always the times that I was up at 10:30 p.m., still trying to get these things to seal, and it's very frustrating. But so that's when I will go back and I'll even look at my own slides and revisit, okay, did I remember to wipe down the rim? Did I do it well enough? Should I have used vinegar? Was I not tightening them properly? And so sometimes it helps to just kind of go troubleshoot again, because you get so kind of into the process. It's like we've all burned things on the stove because you're doing 5 other things and you realize that you've missed something. So step 10 is check the seals. This is easy to do. You just press down the center of the lid. It's like those little seals that pop up in the grocery store when you open a jar. If the center doesn't pop up, it's sealed. And it's the same thing with these guys. Like these are all sealed. There's nothing there to pop up. This one does. It's usually very easy to tell. If you can't tell, what I'll usually do is just take the ring off and then just kind of pull around the edges with my nails and see if it comes off. Usually you can tell right away, like it'll just come off. If it doesn't fully seal, the whole thing will lift. I think I've only had one where I was like, I don't know, like it seems to have sealed, but it was acting weirder than the rest of them, and so I just popped that one in the freezer and then we defrosted it that way when we wanted it. So if the jar isn't sealed, then you can refrigerate them right away. You can also put them in the freezer if you have ample headspace for them. They should be fine. And you can also put them in the refrigerator too, and keep them for a few weeks. And what's kind of cool, if you put them in the fridge, you can wait a couple weeks to eat it because you've sterilized your product. Right? So you've got a longer shelf life in the refrigerator. You do also have the option to reprocess them. I have reprocessed the next morning. Like if I finish something at night, because I was working through dinner, and I get out there the next morning and it's not sealed, I've reprocessed them. Because keep in mind, it's not the equivalent of putting a piece of raw chicken on your countertop for 11 hours. You've already done most of the job of sterilizing that product for harmful bacteria. So at that point, you can reprocess them if you would like. So for storage, generally they last for 18 months. You want to store them out of direct sun and out of extreme heat or cold. So not good for your uninsulated Oklahoma garage. Right. Better suited for a pantry. We have a mudroom that used to be a little back porch that is, it's not nearly as climate controlled as the rest of the house, but it's, our laundry's out there and it does have one little vent, so it's more climate controlled. Just keep them out of the sun. I will say, when I found these cinnamon apples, and these are one of my favorites, this is from January of 2020, we'll absolutely eat these. They look fine. Usually what tends to happen, and I was trying to find one, but I'm pretty good about staying on top of these, you'll notice that while they're still safe, usually far beyond that 18 months, the color will change a little bit, it won't be as vibrant, the texture might change a little bit, so they're still edible, but it just might affect kind of the flavor of them. I should have brought, these were pickled radishes from this year, but I had some from last year too, and they're just not as vibrant pink anymore, but they're still tasty. We just ate some of them. My kids love those too. They complained last night because they saw a mushroom in the sauce, but then they're like, oh yeah, pickled radishes, that's good. Kids are so strange. Okay, so then these are the books that I recommend. The first one here, this is kind of the Bible of home preserving, if you will. It's the Ball Book of Canning and Preserving. I like this book for a lot of reasons. One, because I trust it. You know, it's a great book. Two, because it has lots of stuff in here. And it not only has your traditional stuff, but it has some of the more old school stuff, like watermelon rind, pickled watermelon rind, fresh herb jellies. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones, but it has some of the more old school things that, you know, our grandparents and great grandparents would have made years and years ago when they were canning.
I think they have that at Walmart.
Oh yeah, it's definitely the kind of go-to book. But it's a good book, and it has good information on how to do it. It has step-by-step recipes in here. It has different methodologies. As you can see, I mark in order what I'm planning on doing. I plan ahead for my canning stuff, so I have things ready for the holidays. So this one's a great one. And then I really like this book for small batch stuff. So if you're wanting to, if you're someone who finds things at the farmer's market, or you have a small garden, or it's just you and one other person, this one has like for 2 to 4 jars of really good recipes. And they're really unique. They're a little more modern. The Bloody Mary mix recipe I got from here. And it does also have some fermenting recipes in here too, and tells you step by step how to do it. So this is a great little book, and there's pretty pictures of some of these. I did dandelion jelly this year. I never realized, so I went and collected dandelions from all my neighbors' houses, and it's beautiful. Well, I picked hundreds of thousands of these stupid little petals off of the dandelions, and now I don't want to even eat it. I just want to sit there and look at it and look at my good work, because that took a long time. That took a long time. And it was really cute. I went out to get a couple more to finish off, and I kept having bees land on my hands because I had pollen on them. If you're a gardener like me, you get really nerdy about that stuff. But this is another good book as well. Okay, so I will set us up for a video in a minute. I'm going to assume that we have audio. It might take a little fine tuning. But one of the things I'll go through first, so we went through our jar sizes. So you all know what a ladle is. You look like smart people. The other stuff here, so this is the canning funnel. I like this one. I think this was actually a little kit that Ball makes, but it's nice that it has a handle on it. It just makes it easier, especially if you're doing something sticky, to kind of keep your hands out of jelly. And this is the jar lifter. You use the side that's round. I have seen people that have been like, I've been doing it this way for years. But it's rubber and kind of sticky, and so you just put it around your jar, and it's pretty sturdy. Much easier that way. Then this one is your jar wrench. This is good if you're keeping your jars warm in the oven, and you can just pick them up like that, so you're not having to deal with a pot holder around the top. It makes it a little easier. This is the lid grabber. It has a little magnetic piece at the bottom, and so you just pick up your lids from your boiling water, and then you just place it on top and tilt to the side. So it makes it a lot easier, way easier than using tongs, and especially because these tend to stick together a little bit. So the last one, this is the bubble popper. You would just go around the edges with it. This came with my blue kit. I got this one separately. It's also a bubble popper, but it has measurements on here. Some people are really good at eyeballing it. I'm not one of those people. And so it has measurements for your head space, starting at 1 inch and going down to a 1/4 inch. So if it calls for a 1/4 inch, you just put your little 1/4 inch step on there. If it calls for 1 inch, you can go down. So this one is really helpful for me. Then you adjust for your head space, which I use the other ones, so then I'm not, so again, if you're doing jelly and you measure, you're like, oh shoot, I think I need to fill out, I need to pump bubbles, so you do this, and then you're picking it up and it gets everywhere. You have to wipe your jar lids again. So it's nice to have another one, but this tool I like a lot. Some people use a ruler, they just kind of hold it up and that works too. This was like $2.50, so, it might be a worthwhile investment. Okay, so let's see if we can get this video to play. If not, we can just pass the computer around and.
No, actually, if it doesn't play, if we don't have sound, you can actually put it here.
Okay.
Well, I have a question. My mom used to pressure can all the time. But one time when she was doing it, she was taking the lid off, it exploded and, just burned her face, she had the burns. So what did she not do that? I mean, because she did it all the time. What was her mistake that time?
So the pressure, when you do pressure canning, generally you want to let the jars come to pressure on their own. So you'll either turn the burner off or you'll scoot the pressure cooker off the hot stove, depending on how heavy it is. That when you've got I think I can fit 18 of these jars in my 1 and 2 layers, it's heavy. You want to let the pressure release to 0 naturally because again, it's just that huge burst of cold air that can break your jars. My guess is she probably just hadn't let it release enough so that when she unscrewed it, it popped off. Newer pressure canners won't do that. They've got a series
This was a
of
big old, it's heavy.
Yeah.
and,
Yeah, the newer ones have multiple pressure release valves on there, so you couldn't get those to explode if you tried. There's too many, there's even a little rubber valve on mine that will just go shooting off, and it's big enough then that you can't get the pressure to build up enough. So pressure canning is very safe now. The new canners are easier to use. Yeah.
Well, she did it all, she had done it for years, she did it all the time. So I just couldn't figure out what happened this time.
See, and I've heard those stories and have just shied away from pressure cooking for that very reason. Me being short doesn't help because I have to stand up. My cans are like this, my canner, and I have to stand up on a step stool. And some things get tricky, and I've just been afraid, so I'm excited about learning.
The new ones really are very, very safe. They really are. I've never been nervous about mine. They just have so many built-in safety mechanisms. And that moves into then a lot of, like I said, the soups and stews, the things that if I get home from work and it's already 7 p.m. that I can just heat up and we can eat instead
In other
of
words, it's
getting
not going to
takeout.
use pressure cooker you buy at yard sale.
You can, and I know people that do, but there are people that have canned their whole lives and are
Right.
in their 80s, and so they're really familiar with
Right.
all different styles of pressure canners. I'm not. So I got my nice fancy new ones. I have 2 of them, so I can process 2 batches at the same time, but I've never felt concerned with them at all.
Oh, it's fine.
Yeah.
So how much does
I think, I want to say mine were 140 each, but they come in all price ranges. Mine is also, again, a substantial size. It's a dial gauge, that's what I wanted. So mine is a little more luxurious than some, but I knew I would use it. And
I had a friend who canned Indonesian food, and I think that's problematic because there's no gauge.
yeah, that's my understanding, because
She only did 3 jars.
people say you can do it in an Instant Pot too, and there's been it could be, but nobody has done any research on it. So it makes, when it comes to food safety, don't be moldy peaches guy, right? Again, go back to it's kind of common sense. If you don't know if it's gonna work,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not worth. I mean, more than likely, you're not going to die of botulism. You know, it's really rare for that to happen. But I don't want me and both my kids vomiting either because so. And they're not that expensive. They're really not. The one nice thing too, my pressure canner doubles as a water bath canner, so it's multi-purpose. So again, you know, you can get them for $40 to $50 as well. I would hesitate to get one at a garage sale unless you knew someone who were familiar. Okay, Arnetta, the video's not coming up, and I don't know what to.
Okay, let's put it here.
Let's do it.
Probably could order one to Creekside.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so our wise slide. So first one is to extend your gardening season. I was out in the garden for 6 hours yesterday.
Wow.
6 child-free hours.
Mine is husband free.
Because I expressed to the family it's my only chance and I have to get it done because it's seasonal, because I gotta get it done before. It was wonderful. My back's a little sore today, but it was wonderful. But so yesterday I was getting in all of my greens, replacing some of my kales so I can have more baby kale, lettuce, collards, all of those. I was getting in broccoli and cauliflower. Next week I'll be getting my garlic in the ground. So all of this stuff that's kind of moving us into next season, and then garlic for spring and
I already
summer
have a
next year.
question.
Yeah.
It's not too late to plant all that?
No.
See, and this is the thing that's fascinating to me, because all of Eric's growing up years, I was in the city, was only greens. They relegated all that other stuff to the spring.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying to him, no, honey, you haven't been in all the classes. She said, we can do kale, and we can do lettuce, and we can do.
And especially if you're looking to do season extension, if you have frost cloth or something like that.
If you have what?
Frost cloth.
Uh-huh.
So garden fleece. So any kind of covering or a little low tunnel or something like that, or even old bed sheets will get us through. And man, last year, because we got that stupid early freeze, it was just not fair. Where my tomatoes died and mosquitoes were still alive, and it just felt wrong to me. But last year, my broccoli froze solid and then thawed and kept on growing. You know, some of these plants are really hardy, and we're still about 2 months off from our last average frost. So as long as you're planting cold season stuff,
Right.
you know,
Right,
that'll be
yeah.
okay. Not enough time to plant okra, right?
Yeah, right.
You know, things like that. So it's a timing thing. But so we're preparing for all of that, ensuring your soil is healthy, and this is something that I do year round because I work my garden 3 seasons. I'm not going to do a winter garden this year because at Youth Works we have a new greenhouse that I'll be working in and learning. But this would be the time to do some healthy soil stuff too. I did put down some organic fertilizer last month. And then I will be adding over the winters some compost and things. If I had my beds yesterday that I wasn't putting anything in, this would be the time I'd add some compost, recover with mulch, and let it kind of sleep for the winter.
How about cover crops?
Yep, cover crops are great too. And it will depend on the type of cover crop you do as to when you get it in. Some of them can go in, not quite yet. Some of them will go in soon, and then others you would wait till over winter or spring.
Okay, so what do you cover crop?
It just puts hydrogen back into nitrogen back into your soil.
Yeah, so it's a soil amender. So one of the things when we talk about healthy soils, bare soil is not good. It leads to erosion. It doesn't hold nutrients as much. It's not as healthy. It's not continuing to compost as well. So cover crops are a great way to hold your soil in place and provide nutrients back into the soil. The idea then being that you mow it or till it in the spring.
So, such as?
Such
What type
as
of-
clover is one. There's types of wheatgrass. There's a lot of them.
And there's a plague, and you can do turnips, and you can still have turnips, but
Peas,
huh?
peas you can do too.
Oh, I didn't see, but there's a place in Collinsville.
Yeah,
Holman's or
I think it's Holman's.
it's in Collinsville, and they have tons of seeds.
They're
for
very
cover
wise,
crops,
too.
and their prices are awesome.
Yeah.
In
so cover crops are
Collinsville.
great.
Pardon me?
In
In
Collinsville.
Collinsville.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I've even done cover crops where I don't do, we have raised beds, and so I can't really fully till, and I do no-till gardening anyway. But even with mine, there are certain ones that I can just weed eat in the spring, as long as I'm doing transplants. You couldn't do a row of seed, you'd have to tear up the whole row. But if I'm transplanting little seedlings in the spring, you can just leave them and they'll die off with the heat. But so they're great.
Okay, I do have a question.
Uh-huh.
We had a one bale of alfalfa hay last year. Okay, I grow elderberries.
Okay.
Okay, so I had this bright idea that I would put that in alfalfa all around under the elderberries. It'd be really good for them over the winter. Well, those grasshoppers went nuts. Was that the wrong thing to use because of the alfalfa?
I don't think so. I think you just had an unfortunate grasshopper incident.
This is the
With
second year
those
in a row.
seeds, with those seeds not.
Well, I just thought, oh my gosh, did I just annihilate and I did not get a cup of elderberries. I didn't get even a cup.
I have heard, there are a few people that have grasshopper problems this year.
Okay.
So I don't think you're alone in that.
So I thought, I am never doing that again. And
So
I'm
what do
gonna-
you use, what do you cover?
What would I put down?
Well, I use either alfalfa, straw, or wood chips, and I alternate pine and cedar. Yeah. So I try to mix mine up a little bit because all of them have a slightly different nutrient profile. And yes, the straw and the alfalfa will seed a little bit. If you get the weed-free straw, that helps because the seeds have already been harvested off of it, but I cure mine, so I'll let it, in fact, I need to get another bale or two for spring. I'll sit it out over the winter, so then it'll get saturated, wet, kill off the germ of the seed, and then it won't sprout as much.
That's how you do that.
Yeah.
Okay,
But in all honesty too, I've used straw bales, and some people, and I'm speaking more to my gardening clients, where if you are growing lettuces or something like baby greens that are real dense, a couple little straw plants coming up doesn't really bother me. Like, it's not going to do anything, and all I'm going to do is pull it eventually and let it die so the nutrients are going back into the soil. Some people though are they want their garden to look weed-free completely. I will say though, if I was doing baby greens, you don't want those little shoots because then you're trying to pick around little monocot grasses. But if I have tomato plants or something, what do I care, right? If there's a few little weeds coming out. But it just kind of depends on how much that bothers you. My garden's big enough and it's just me, and now I manage 3 other gardens, and so I don't have time to be bothered. But yeah, curing your straw bales will help substantially.
And so you just set them out and let them sit out.
Yep,
Okay.
yeah. So it'll help a lot. Good time to do that too. The next is to maintain a healthy environment for next spring. And all of the things that we're talking about right now feed into that. So healthy soil does more than just grow plants. It also can help prevent pests and disease from kind of infesting. So the more you maintain your soil, if it's covered, if it's still getting some moisture, the better off it's going to be, and it can decrease your chances of some insects or disease. Especially if you think of squash plants with stupid squash bugs. You know, every year they move in, then they lay their larvae in the soil. So if you just leave your dead plants in there, you're just asking for more problems. You know, so good garden sanitation is important for that.
Question.
Yeah.
So, well, you saw the garden. And I think you were on the text message where I sent out, or the email where I sent out a few pictures of what the squash plants looked like 2 weeks after we had the class out there. You would have never thought I had a problem. I mean, the squash bugs went somewhere else. Where they went, I don't know.
Where do they go?
I don't know where they went, but the
They lay eggs
same
in
ones that were
overbearing
just
soil.
about annihilated came back. They came back and did beautifully. I mean, I was just shocked, and I didn't do anything. You know?
That's a big tenet of integrated pest management, is knowing what insects you have a problem with and working with their life cycle. Because there are some,
They have a lifetime.
Yeah, and so do vine borers, squash vine borers do as well.
uh-huh.
So if you plant late enough in the season, sometimes you can mitigate for that. So
Uh-huh.
a lot of that is knowing your pest and knowing your
Okay, so
insects.
since I'm in plastic and we've pulled up everything that we think, should I go back in there again and check for any kind of roots?
No, I would just pull up everything above the surface and make sure you rotate crops next year.
Yes. Okay.
Yep. And And then the last thing, and this is a big one too, to make your spring gardening easier. Because every year, and even yesterday I did some of this, where I'm always like, oh, it'll take me 2 hours. It never takes me 2 hours. Like, it always takes twice as long. But when you're out in your spring garden, if you haven't pulled up any of the stuff from last year, if you haven't put mulch down, if you haven't amended your soil, you have just compounded all of that work so that all of a sudden now you're like, oh shoot, it's my window to get spring crops in, like now, and you're out there for days trying to get everything done. So the more you can gradually keep your garden healthy, it just sets you up with a nice blank, clean canvas for next year. We're gonna go through a few things for the plants that you might be keeping in your garden. One of the big things is make sure you're maintaining moisture and water, even into the winter. If you have cold weather crops that are going in, check on your water. We've been on an ultra high heat watering schedule now for a while, and now we're kind of coming to an end. And plus weather, where now instead of my drip hoses, I don't mind being out hand watering because it's not like living on the surface of Mars while I'm hand watering. But make sure that you're amending your watering practices. Your plants are not going to need nearly as much water right now because it's not evaporating as much. Some of your plants might have been through their biggest growth cycle. They might not be needing as much water or taking up as much. So make sure you're checking up with your water. And then start pruning your plants back or trimming them to keep them manageable and healthy. So at the Garden at the Youth Works Ranch right now, we've got 8 tomato plants, and they're driving me absolutely crazy because I'm trying to teach the kids to prune them up and to figure out diseases and things, and that's on our actually we're going to talk about that today. And I've been putting it off because we have 4 orb weaver spiders that are about ready to go, and I keep trying to let them go off on their own because I feel bad removing their webs when they're almost ready to procreate here. But you do want to be sure that you are pruning things back. Those tomatoes got infested with spider mites, so a lot of the older branches are just decimated and need to be cleaned up. There's new growth coming in that we want to train in a healthful way over their cages. So keep doing that for all of your plants. And same with the okra there is now taller than me. I don't know whomever put in that soil to make okra grow like that, but it's apparently awesome soil. And so it's taller than me, and these things are about this big. So we're gonna have to prune off some middle branches just so we can get through the rows. So keep those things up. I know, it's such a blessing to have.
Okay, so we've done that on the okra. We've gone and trimmed back, and they look beautiful, and they're way up here. But the tomatoes, like with the tomatoes and the peppers, I don't know what variety I used that I did not get what I thought I was getting. I thought we planted big beef tomatoes, and we've got all these cherry tomatoes. Now those we haven't trimmed back, but is that like, do I keep it going?
Yeah, you absolutely can. I know tomatoes is in here too, so wait for a minute, let's be sure we touch on those, but I think there's a slide on those. And then next, continue to replenish mulch if you need to. I noticed a few of my beds yesterday as I was putting some seed down, the mulch is kind of broken down like you want it to. So it's about time for me to put something else on there for the remainder of winter. And then continue adequate but cautious fertilization. And I say that because now if you have some plants that have basically grown through their growth cycle, like if you have a squash plant, which is a bad example in Oklahoma because they're so hard to keep alive for this long, but if you still have one, it's not getting bigger and bushier. It's kind of at its mature size. So don't keep feeding it nutrients it doesn't need unless you haven't fertilized for a while. So it's a good time to test your soil because now is a great time to get those results back and say, oh wow, I guess all of this bed this year, there's almost no nitrogen left because I had some big plants in there this year. Need to get some fertilizer down probably this year, get my compost in, so that way it'll be working its way into the soil for spring. The first thing here are herbs. If you have perennial herbs, keep pruning them back to keep them nice and bushy and healthy. You don't want to wait until it's really, really cold and then start chopping them off. Make sure that you're just gradually trimming them. Pull any annual herbs after they've gone to seed. So I'm trying to think what I pulled yesterday. Some of my chamomile, some of my cilantro that I had put in midsummer. It's time to take those seeds and remove them. And then preserve everything. So we have some massive stevia plants. So right now I'll be making stevia extract that'll hopefully last us all winter. So get those out. If you're wanting to preserve them and freeze them or do anything else with them, now's the time to keep doing that so you have a store for winter. I thought I had more
talking liquid stevia?
Yes. So I thought I had more slides on
Good
here for
question.
specific,
She-
but let's talk about, so with liquid stevia.
Can you steam them? And,
You can, you usually boil and reduce them with some alcohol. I usually use a vodka base, like you would vanilla extract. Yeah, stevia plants they produce, I don't even say a lot, they get about as big as a good basil plant, but they are so unbelievably sweet, you don't need much.
yeah.
So I've taken cuttings from them. I brought some stevia in for my indoor aeroponic tower, so it'll grow over the winter, but I'll have our big batch made. So apparently in one of the stevia extracts, there's one of the stabilizers in there now, they're finding linked to cancer or something. It's just better to make your own. It's just always
I
better.
didn't know you could make your own.
I didn't either.
Because I use it all the time.
I'm planting next year, it's one of my things to plant next year.
So I was thinking I had more slides in here for specifics, but yeah, let's talk about our tomatoes and let's talk about okra and a few other things. So okra is just producing now. It's been hot, it's been happy, so it'll just keep itself going until it gets less hot and less happy. With tomatoes, so when you have tomatoes, there's determinate versus indeterminate. The indeterminate ones are the ones that are still growing and growing. And they vine, they're a vining plant. We think of tomatoes as all being bush plants, but they're not. If you look at native tomatoes, they're vining plants. And so usually what happens is it'll keep growing up. You'll have an upward growth pattern. We tend not to put them on the side just because things tend to eat them if we have them on the ground, even though they're a vine. So now you want to be getting off any of the branches that are dead or dying. I thin mine out if in the very middle it's just this like incredibly bushy plant that's getting no airflow. And then the way I train mine is up and over their cages. So right now I'm pulling branches down the sides and that's how I'll grow them for the remainder of the season. You can top them, some people hack off branches. It'll probably stunt your production a little bit, but it's a different thought process for us home growers than a market farmer. If you're like in the YouthWorks indoor greenhouse, we will have some aquaponic containers for tomatoes. For those, we're going to be growing them all the time, and we'll train them gradually up layers of PVC and over, so we get maximized production from those. But for us, we're just trying to get them through winter. So the more you can make them continue to be manageable for you, the better, and just get any dead or diseased plant parts off of them. Now for peppers, wasn't that bad this year, but it was last year. Some of the types of peppers you'll notice when it gets really hot gets this kind of ripply looking foliage, tighter clusters of leaves. They're not as broad and shiny. That part you can prune off, and then the new growth that comes in now that we have cooler nights will be healthier. So you'll just prune those off and those will be better. Everything else, if you're talking just in general, like sweet potatoes are just growing right now, you're just trying to keep them insect free and healthy. Other pepper plants, you're just trying to keep them insect free and healthy. If you have cantaloupe and watermelon vines and they've already produced, you can pull those because they're probably not going to flower again, so you can get them out of there. So just kind of the basics of keeping everything else going. Same thing if you still have cucumbers, just make sure that they're staying disease free and just give them some love.
Did you see that picture that Earl Stickling put on of all of his sweet potatoes? I mean, when we went and saw it, the vines were everywhere, but he was getting ready to harvest. I mean, they still look beautiful.
They're
I
such
just-
pretty plants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just-
Sweet potatoes just love it here. I think we've got 6 grow bags, and I'm anticipating last year we had 43 pounds of potatoes from like 4 smart pots.
Wow.
Yeah, they just
I have
grow
quite a
and
bit,
grow.
I have a
and grow.
lot. When I started digging them up, I thought, some of them were ridiculous, but they're still
Yeah.
good.
Oh yeah, they're
Yeah.
still wonderful.
And that's what I'm interested in canning. I've never canned
Sweet potatoes.
sweet potatoes. I've made the mix up and froze it. you know, just when they had made my sweet potato pie mix up, or pumpkin pie mix up, and then froze it flat, but I've never canned it. Savory, period.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So then we're gonna bring our attention to the things that can be overwintered. So this is the time to start planning. If you're wanting greens to go as far into the winter as possible, now is the time to get your setup going because you need to select your varieties and your plants appropriately. So really, any cold hardy plants can be theoretically overwintered, but it does take some work. You're not gonna be able to just go out there in our climate and just leave broccoli and cauliflower going all winter. It does get too cold and it will freeze. So you need to plan some frost protection. But if you're wanting some of your stuff to continue growing, you can absolutely do that. Brussels sprouts, I prefer growing over the winter. Here, we just don't have a long enough spring to get them going to where you get good Brussels sprouts in the spring, and most people plant them too late. Carrots and cauliflower, you can do Irish potatoes again. Usually fall season potatoes are much smaller, but you can still get a harvest of them. And then your leafy greens, kales, lettuces, those types of things, mustard greens, collard greens. Garlic and onion can go in now, and then parsnips we're a little late for, but those will still go. And then spinach it's almost ideal time, maybe another week or two even for spinach because it really likes
Okay,
the
so
cold
if you
seasons.
have one of those covers over it, then this will go.
Yep, then you can keep it going. Yep,
Right.
we've kept lettuce going all year.
I just thought it was.
Now there are some asterisks here, and we've been talking a lot with YouthWorks about this because even with high tunnels, that doesn't mean your plants are growing inside because they not only fluctuate in temperature a little bit, and temperature affects your plant processes, just like humans. If you hear those incredible stories of people who almost drown and they've been unconscious in a river, you know, for hours, but then they essentially thaw them out, you know, in the hospital and they're fine. Our processes slow down. Plants' processes slow down too. So not everything is going to grow. Basil won't grow in the middle of winter here, even if you have ideal lighting and temperature, or ideal temperature because of lighting. If it doesn't have a certain number of daylight hours, it won't grow. So our days are getting shorter. So there are certain things, it's not an apples to apples comparison, even if you have inside. So that's why a lot of crops we see at the farmer's market in winter are pretty specific, because they're the ones that will still sustain throughout the winter. So we'll talk about now frost protection. So you want to add frost protection whenever temperatures are below freezing, obviously. And I do this even for my fairly cold hardy crops. If it's getting close and it's saying, oh, it's supposed to get 36 tonight, I'm like, okay, I think they'll be okay. But if they're saying it could get down to freezing, I'll put my frost cloth down over my plants that I want to be keeping. Certainly different varieties are going to hold up to frost better. Your tomato plants are not going to tolerate you leaving them out in the winter. They're going to die immediately, whereas like I said, my broccoli and cauliflower are frozen solid and they just keep doing their thing. So certain ones are going to fare better. Keep in mind that each layer of frost protection you do is generally going to increase the air temperature by 5 to 10 degrees. The one thing you have on your side though is it will also help maintain soil temperature, and the warmer your soil is, the more it's going to affect your ambient air temperature and protect the root system of your plants. So it's going to help that too. You can put multiple layers on of maybe 2 or 3 winters ago when we had that stretch where it was like -3 for a high for a couple days. In my high tunnel, it never got below 36 degrees, ever. So you can layer things, and that's what I did. I had multiple layers of stuff, and I left it undisturbed so that it stayed as warm as possible in there. And then the only important qualities for your frost protection are that it lets in sunlight. You can't just cover it with a black tarp and expect things to grow. Your plants do need sunlight and air circulation. And that it keeps out as much cold air as possible. And here's some examples. So the first one here, you see these little plastic bottles. These are great if you have little individual lettuce plants, and you can use milk jugs too. And you just pop these guys over. They have some ventilation in them, or you can poke some holes in them so that they're not holding moisture in that will then freeze on your plant. But these guys will work great. You can buy individual plant covers. Some of them can be pricey, but very effective. So if you know you're going to be gardening after the first frost, they can be a worthwhile purchase. On the upper right is the little pop-out greenhouse that we had that for like 10 years, and it was maybe $85. And so if you just have some containers or a bed that you want to put that over, those are great. They work really, really well. On the bottom left is a more official looking cold frame. These are built generally for people who want things like herbs and greens all winter. When you put blacks in these guys, they will heat up more, so you can get them the temperature up quite a bit because of that essentially greenhouse processing where it holds the heat from the sunlight in. And then you just want to be sure, because we do have winter days where then all of a sudden it shoots up to 50 degrees, that you can open the top to let some air circulation in so you don't roast your plants in there. And then the bottom right is a low tunnel, so just a PVC frame with frost cloth put over it and held down with a brick. Really simple, easy way to get your beds through a few frosts.
And for all of these, you're talking about transplants.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for the most part. I put down some leafy green seeds yesterday. We should have time for those to sprout. I put down some beets. That may or may not work. We might be just eating beet greens from them, because I think it's a little late.
That's
So-
what I was gonna ask.
Yeah, yeah. So this is just a row cover. It doesn't even have a frame. If like last year's frost where we had that one day, if it's going to be frosty and you have one bed and you're like, shit, I just really want to get this for the next 2 weeks, and the forecast looks like it's looking really nice, just throw this over there, seal it down. The thing with these guys is you do want to be sure that you get it down when it is still light out. You want to get these put down before the hottest part of the day so that they can hold all that heat in. And then this is the same thing, but this is just a little fancier. This is a floating row cover, but same idea. This is better if you have plants that are taller. So sometimes if you have the frost cloth right on the plants, the plant will get some frost damage right on the surface. So this keeps that circulation going in there and holds some heat. So this is all stuff, if you're wanting to do this, source it now and get it ready to go. I'll be getting my hoops out this year in probably next week, making sure I have frost cloth that's still in good shape to put out. One more note on the frost cloth, it does come in different thicknesses. The thicker it is, the more heat it's gonna hold in, but also the thicker it is, the less sunlight it will allow in. So if you are putting it out there and you're wanting to keep it all winter, you might find a happy medium between the two, depending on how cold hardy your plants are and what time you're putting it out. But again, you can also have one of these tunnels and pull another layer right over your plants inside too. So you can get double insulation.
Could that also be used as bud net?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely,
Just
yep.
the lightest weight maybe. I mean, I can pull it off and use it on my elderberry plants
Yep.
next spring.
Absolutely.
Maybe try to.
It should, if you get good frost cloth, it should last a couple years.
Okay.
So next up, we should be looking to store seeds. If you have herbs that you're pulling up, basil right now is going to seed. So save your basil seeds. Dill, my second round of dill is going to seed. I'll be saving those, my borage. Some tomatoes will be coming up here when we get our second round of tomatoes for fall for some of our earling plants. I got these incredible banana pepper seeds, so I will be absolutely saving those for next year. So now is the time that you want to be saving all of those seeds. So get them off of your plant, wait for the fruit to ripen, bring them out of the light in a dry location. Moisture is always going to be your biggest enemy of seed saving. So make sure they're out until you absolutely know those babies are dry. So find a place where you can keep them out of moisture and sunlight. And then you can also, if you're wanting to save them for multiple seasons, store them in the fridge or freezer. It'll help preserve them too. We have a little, in our deep freezer, we have a little space in the back where I keep some of my heirloom seeds because I want them to last for a long time. Which was also, I was very dismayed about them when the power outage was out too, and harping on my husband with the generator. I was like, get it going. The tomato seeds are in there. And we did. But so be thinking about that as well. If you have plants that you're ready to get rid of as things just start dying off, my cucumbers are done. I garden organically, so they got cucumber beetles and they're done. Get that stuff out of there in a timely manner. If it's diseased, unless you are really good at composting, I don't recommend putting diseased plant matter in there. I put mine in the trash. If you're really good at composting and you know you're getting the temperature up and you're temping it, then you can go ahead and put those in there. But otherwise, I would dispose of them. If you just have plants that die, you can absolutely compost those. Just make sure they're not weeds and they're disease free. This will also help you prevent disease and pests if you clear out your garden. Like I was saying before, if you have squash plants out there, squash bugs can still get at those. So make sure you're getting all of those plants out that aren't going to attract any additional pests in. Also, fungus and bacteria can survive during the winter, so if you have a bacterial infection in your cucumbers, be aware that that bacteria might overwinter itself. Another good idea for crop rotation, but get that plant matter out of there. Don't give it a chance to proliferate in your soil. Insects can also lay eggs on plants and roots. Case in point again, squash bugs. They can still lay eggs on an almost dead squash. So get those plants out of there. There's no benefit to keeping them in your garden. And then again, you can compost any of this stuff if you're willing to do it properly. I just have a little compost tumbler, so for me, I just put things in there that I know aren't going to cause new weeds and new disease. But if you're a good composter, you can put those things in there. So then the next step is to remove all weeds and dead weed plants. This year, my husband, who is wonderful, decided that he was going to mow our very large yard himself, which I knew from the get-go was a bad idea, because it takes a long time, and mowing around my garden takes a long time because you've got to edge around raised beds and things. But because my lawn service was free this year, now I have a lot of Bermuda grass growing on the sides because it would sit out there growing until I started getting fussy. And by that, yelling and getting mad about it. So now I am dealing with Bermuda grass. But I am going out there, getting it out, pulling it from the center out, and getting all those rhizomes out. If you leave it over winter, it will grow and it will continue getting into your bed. And it will become a problem to the point where in the spring, you're either going to have to solarize it once it's hot next summer, or you're gonna have to use a product like Roundup or something to get rid of it. My double strategy this year is to pull all of those plants out, and once all of my vegetable plants are dead, I'm gonna take Roundup around the edges on the one side of my beds, kill off the grass on that side, just a little bit, and then it'll be months before I'm putting anything else in the bed, so it'll be gone and I'll eliminate that. But do that now. Same thing, if you have weeds, they can and will go to seed, and they look a little innocuous, but when you leave them in there, then you will get 100 new weed seeds that come up. So make sure you're getting that stuff out. Some weeds even need a chill period to regrow. They require the cold in order to break open the next year. There's a few of our natives here that do that. So again, get them out of the garden. Seeds are very cool. There is a certain type of a pine, not in Oklahoma, but I knew it grew in northwestern corner of Colorado when we still lived in Colorado, that they can survive for about 100 years in the soil, and they don't sprout unless there is a fire. So they're one of the plants that comes back then once there's a forest fire. Very cool. That's very cool if you're a gardener like me. As we talked about before, it's a great time to amend your soil. Keep in mind, organic matter, compost, anything that was living, cover crops would fall into this category, increases soil health. So it's a great time to add that. I like adding my compost at the end of the growing season just because then it has time to start decomposing and working its way into my soil for the spring. So you can go ahead and add those now.
What was the name of the compost place that you recommended?
Restored Organics. They're up by the free mulch site. And their prices are good too. I think for like a 1.5 cubic feet, their bags are like $10 or $11 or something. And it's really
What is it called?
Restored Organics.
Where is it at?
Up by the free mulch site in North Tulsa.
Oh.
Yeah. They got a lot of free mulch right now. It's a great time to get some mulch. So if you have soil in your garden and you're realizing it's not ideal, now is a good time to amend for next spring too. So if you find you have sandy soil, most of us don't. Every once in a while you will, especially if somebody tried to amend their landscaping and added too much sand. Sandy soil is noted by having really good drainage, and it's really easy to add things in because it's easy to stir. But the cons are it drains really, really fast. So that means if we have a stretch of a week where it's hot and dry, it'll drain really quickly. So that's a symptom if you had sandy soil. Clay soil, which is what most of us would have, holds moisture well. It usually has a lot of nutrients. It's a very nutrient-rich soil. The cons, of course, is roots can sometimes have trouble getting through it, and watering can be difficult if it dries out because it turns into a lump of hard clay. So you might want to amend that too. And then finally, loamy soil, which is what my garden beds finally are. It took me a number of years to get them where I like it. But this is what we all want. It's where it holds water well, but it drains really easily. Roots move through it and thrive, and it's also easy to till it and stir it. That's what we're looking for. So a good time to add amendments. If you have sandy soil, you can start to add more compost and organic matter. That's going to be helpful. You can add some peat moss or cocoa coir in there to help hold moisture in. You can even just add even some topsoil or something similar, not much, but just enough to kind of bulk up the minerals in there and the different size particles. If you have clay soil, peat is going to be your friend. Adding some sand there can help with drainage, so you can start to kind of amend as you would like. With loamy soil, keep up the good work. If you have loamy soil, you're just going to continue on your process of adding whatever you've been adding.
And so you're just layering from the top.
It's up to you. I just layer from the top because I have raised beds, and I worked really, really hard for a number of years to get a good worm ecology and spiders to be in my garden where I want them. So I do not till. There's lots of benefits to that. If you have a big, giant in-the-ground garden, though, tilling can be much easier, and then you can till in amendments if you would like to. There's multiple schools of thought, so it's just two different methods.
For the clay soil, peat.
Peat moss, yeah.
Okay, that's it, huh?
Peat moss. And you can even, depending on how much of an area you have, sometimes even a good potting soil will work. It'll add some bark and other pieces in there and add drainage. Keep in mind, you should never feel compelled to replace your soil. It's a question that I get asked often, especially in raised beds and containers. When do I replace it? You should never feel like you have to. You should be on a maintenance schedule and giving it enough love that you continue to use it. Poor soil quality can come from a lot of things. So environmental factors, think if you move into a new house and somebody had a rose garden there and they were really overzealous with certain chemicals. If you move into a new home and the builder is like, here's your garden, you don't really know what's gone into that soil or if there's debris in it. High pesticide application is a real problem. We don't use really many pesticides in our garden. We try to minimize it. And by that, I do use organic pesticides. And like I said, I do use Roundup sparingly. I believe there is a time and a place for every product. But it's really easy to also over-fertilize. And it's really easy to use pesticides to a point where it's becoming detrimental. And think of your soil. Your soil is, you'll hear about like the soil food web. It's a living organism. There's millions of different creatures living in your soil, so it has its own ecology. So if you keep spraying pesticides, and this is another one I know I've ranted to you all before, but about the Dawn dish soap thing, like stop putting it in your gardens. Like I don't know where this came from or why people think this is a good idea. It sanitizes. When it gets into your soil, it's sanitizing it. You don't want it to be sanitized. It's horrible for your soil. It's killing all of those little microorganisms that you want. Just so you can tell people, just stop with the Dawn dish soap. And people will get on me for using Roundup, and they're like, "Can't you use dish soap?" And it's like, it's actually not better. It's going to stay in your soil and have more of a long-term effect. So you want to be sure that you're keeping your soil healthy.
So what about 30% vinegar?
Vinegar is a little more forgiving.
I'm trying to kill out goji berries.
Oh yeah,
Can I do that with that
you
straight
can.
on?
You can. It'll take it a few years to completely work out of your soil. But if you're just wanting some native grasses or something, it should be okay. Yeah, we have a little goji berry tree that we're planting in our easement for the reason that then they can deal with mowing over it, you know, if once it goes crazy. Because yeah, they will grow here. They love this plant. Another thing to consider is if you have not been doing proper crop rotation. It's time to plan for that because your soil is suffering for it. So you can already start kind of pre-planning for next year. Next is no adequate fertilization. If you never put any kind of fertilizer down or amending, your soil might not be in good shape. And then lack of proper amendments. I see this with a lot of gardeners who are really well intended, but they'll keep putting the same type of fertilizer down, like they find a Miracle Grow or one of those other brands, and they just keep applying it over and over and over again, even though it's not prescriptive to what they need. And then you can end up with too little of certain nutrients and really high levels of others. So be cognizant of what you're putting down in your garden. So when you're looking for a soil amendment,